네, 반갑습니다. 시간이 많지 않기 때문에 조금 간단하게 오늘 강사를 소개를 드리고 시작을 하도록 하겠습니다. 사실 더 이상 소개가 필요 없는 정말 세계적인 학자라는 말을 잘 안 쓰는데 그 표현이 결코 무색하지 않은 그런 훌륭한 신학자를 오늘 모시게 되었습니다. 우리 볼프 교수님은 삼위일체론에 대한 그런 아주 정통한 학자이시면서 또 이분이 오랫동안 민족, 종교, 인종 이런 갈등과 또 참상, 살인 이런 것들로 인해서 굉장히 큰 고통을 겪었던 이 발칸반도에서 태어나시고 성장하시고 또 우리 볼프 교수님 아버님이 목사님이시면서 그 가운데서 굉장히 어려움을 많이 겪으셨기 때문에 상당히 이렇게 순수신학, 정통신학에 대해서도 관심이 많고 조예가 굉장히 깊으신 분이시지만은 우리 볼프 교수님의 또 한편으로 굉장히 신학적인 어떤 진지한 관심이 용서, 화해 또 나쁜 상처들에 대한 기억들을 어떻게 처리할 것인가, 해결할 것인가. 그런데 그런 아주 실천적인 면에서도 제가 볼 때는 발군의 어떤 통찰력을 발휘하는 책들을 많이 쓰셨고, 또 최근에는 우리가 소위 말하는 공공신학, 또 정치신학 이런 분야에서도 가장 왕성한 활동을 하시는. 그래서 우리식으로 표현하면은 요즘 가장 핫한 신학자이십니다. 그래서 사실 이렇게 모시기가 쉬운 분이 아닌데 우리 또 오늘 통역해 주시는 차재승 교수님이 흔쾌히 또 이렇게 연결을 해주시고 배려를 해주시고 원래 우리 볼프 교수님 모시려면은 막 이렇게 굉장히 넓은 장소에서 많은 청중들을 이렇게 운집해 갖고 해야 되는데 좀 저희가 그런 면에서 환경이 불비합니다만은 거기가 또 아랑곳하지 않으시고 우리 볼프 교수님이 오셔서 강의를 해주셔서 너무 감사하고 제가 막 며칠 전부터 가슴이 막 설레이고 뛰었습니다. 그래서 오늘 강의해 주실 때 여러분들에게 많은 도전과 또 깨우침과 나아가야 될 방향을 제시해 줄 수 있는 그런 시간이 되리라고 믿고 결코 여러분들이 후회하지 않을 그런 명강의 시간이 되리라고 생각을 합니다. 이제 볼프 교수님 나오셔서
앞에 조금 인사부터 제가
우리 이제 강의 진행하실 때 여러분들 우리 교회에서 쓰는 말로 많은 은혜 받으시기 바랍니다.
Good evening to everyone. Good evening. I'm honored to be here with you and to be able to present this lecture to you.
네, 여기 이렇게 올 수 있게 돼서 너무 영광이고 또 이 강의를 함께 나눌 수 있게 돼서 참 영광입니다.
I'm also thankful for the publishing house to have translated one of my very difficult books.
새물결 출판사가 삼일체와 교회를 출판했는데 굉장히 어려운 책을 출판해서 너무 고맙습니다.
One of my students who now teaches at Yale thinks that this was my best book.
그 책이 제일 좋은 책이라고 생각합니다. 예일에 있는 학생이 그렇게 얘기한다.
So very good choice.
좋은 선택을 하셨습니다.
The present series of lectures that I was giving, that I'm giving now here and elsewhere in Seoul, are connected with the new book that I'm working on, and which is on the nature of theology and on renewal of theology.
예, 지금 강의하는 이 강의는 원래 이제 시리즈 강의를 여러 개를 같이 하는 가운데 하나인데 앞으로 새로 출판하게 될 신학의 그 본질에 관한 새로 출판하게 9월달에 아마 나올 겁니다. 미국에서 그 책의 내용입니다.
And I'm proposing that the theme of flourishing or of the good life, of the true life, should be at the center of theological endeavor.
예, 가장 중요한 주장이 이 책 속에 번영의 삶, 이제 우리 번영 신학하고 연관이 있는 게 아니고요. 분명히 다릅니다. 번역의 삶 혹은 진정한 삶, 참된 삶, 그것이 이제 우리 기독교인의 가장 중요한 핵심적인 주제가 되어야 된다라는 그런 주장을 합니다.
And this is because I believe that the theme of flourishing is at the very center of the Christian faith.
그 이유는 이제 그 번영하는 삶이 우리 기독교 신앙의 가장 중요한 그 중앙에 위치해야 된다고 믿기 때문입니다.
The second sentence in the lecture reads like this: the flourishing of human beings along with all God's creatures in the presence of God is God's foremost concern for creation and should be the central purpose of theology.
굉장히 길게 지금 써 있는데 이제 곧 보실 겁니다. 이게 두 번째 문장에서 나올 건데 결국 같은 얘기입니다. 그 번영하는 삶, 그 진정한 삶, 그것이 이제 하나님이 계획하시는 창조 세계의 가장 중요한 핵심적인 내용이다 그런 뜻입니다.
I think it's also the central purpose of Christian mission.
예, 기독교 그 선교에도 가장 선교가 이제 포괄적일 수 있죠. 기독교 선교에도 그것이 가장 중요한 그 가지입니다.
What I will try to do in this lecture is to sketch why the theme of flourishing is so important.
예, 지금 특별히 이 강의에서 강조할 거는 그 번영의 삶 혹은 진정한 삶이 왜 그렇게 중요한가라는 것을 이제 설명하기를 원합니다.
Why it corresponds to an important quest in the search of human beings, particularly today.
왜 오늘 같은 맥락에서 왜 그 질문이 다른 그 인간에 대한 굉장히 중요한 질문들과 서로 상응하는가에 대한 그런 얘기를 설명을 할 것입니다.
So I'll say something about what I mean by flourishing, how it is a central human concern, and why it particularly matters today. This is the plan for the lecture today. What does flourishing mean?
그 진실된 삶이 무엇인가?
Why is it the central
왜
human concern?
그것이 우리가 가져야 되는 가장 중요한 관심인가?
And why and how it particularly matters today.
예, 그게 이제 왜 또 어떻게 오늘날 같은 문명에서 그것이 중요한가? 이제 세 가지 주제를 오늘 강의를 할 것입니다.
And so I'll pick up the lecture from the first part. In here I'll do the reading, right? Yeah, so the first part we'll skip.
지금 여기 저 영상 돌리시는 분께 마이 플러싱의 넘버 1인데 이게 표시가 안 돼서
예,
그게 슬라이드로 따지면 많이 넘어갈 겁니다. 한 6개, 7개 넘어갈 건데 시작하는 게 마이 플러리싱 라이프로 시작합니다. 가정에서
I think I only have to hold it like this because it's a little bit too far and the script is too small. Okay. By flourishing life, we mean the good toward which human beings are meant to strive. It names not so much any number of things that we desire, but the ultimate goal of our striving, along with the tables of values which determine what is truly worth desiring. We use it more or less interchangeably with the true life, the good life, life worth living, human fullness, life abundant, life that truly is life. There are many ways in which we can express this idea. And although the good life is a technical term of art in classical philosophy and in Christian theology, we prefer the title flourishing life because it is clearly universal in scope, including the flourishing of creation, and avoids popular images of the good life, which is connected with extravagant consumption. Granted, flourishing can also conjure visions of life aloof from hardship and injustice, so we will sometimes use the term true life to make space for hard, arduous forms of life worth living can take under the conditions of present life, under the condition prior to the arrival of God's new creation, under the conditions of sin. Each of these terms has its own intellectual pedigree in the broad tradition of reflection on human nature, destiny, and place in the world. For us, the Christian faith decisively shapes the character of the flourishing life. Now, visions of flourishing are sometimes like vivid images we see and can describe to ourselves and others. Maybe like the Garden of Eden or the New Jerusalem. But mostly they are like a lens through which we see everything, the tacit background against which we live our lives, as Charles Taylor put it. If they are only implicit, we need to tease them out, make them explicit. In either case, it is our human responsibility to reflect on their function, their origin, content, and existential or intellectual adequacy, because they define our world and our very selves. We can switch from one vision to another, but if we do so in reality and not just in our imagination, we become a new person. We come to experience ourselves and our world in a different way, and our lives, in a sense, take a new turn. Now, for much of humans' early history, human beings saw their ultimate good in certain natural forms of well-being, in health, in wealth, in fertility, and longevity, generally what goes today under the title prosperity gospel. Health, wealth, fertility, and longevity. During what some philosophers and sociologists have described as axial transformations, a sense of inadequacy of such natural accounts of human flourishing crystallized. Today's world religions emerged out of these transformations. Each stands for an alternative idea that the ultimate good consists in forms of natural well-being. They all, each in its own way, distinguish between mundane and transcendent realms, and they all, again each in their own way, claim that the ultimate good consists in alignment of the self and society with the transcendent order. At the heart of the great world religions lies an answer to the question of true life, good life, genuinely flourishing life. Now, world religions provide the most enduring, most widespread, and arguably still most potent visions of human flourishing. But religions are not the only source of such visions. For many great philosophers, an articulation of the good life is a central concern. Either it is a pivot around which their philosophies turn, or an indispensable theme of their philosophies. This is true, for instance, of Socrates and Plato, Aristotle and Spinoza, Hume, Kant, Mill, Nietzsche. You can name many of philosophers of this sort. In recent centuries, some philosophers have come to advocate what might be described as modern and secular version of the pre-axial account of human good as natural well-being. Nietzsche might be the most radical among them, as he contests all forms of distinction between mundane and transcendent realms. Whether the distinction is drawn between sensible and supersensible worlds, as in Plato and monotheist religions, for instance, or within the world itself, as in Karl Marx and some forms of secular humanism. Still, he too had a vision of the kinds of human beings he wanted to see bred or raised. Though the world's religions and philosophers offer a diverse vision of the flourishing life, these visions we propose share three formal features. Flourishing life has a tripartite structure. Each world religion or philosophy gives an account of life going well, life being led well, and life feeling as it should. Life going well refers to the circumstantial dimension of the flourishing life, to the desirable circumstances of life be they natural, like fertile, uncontaminated land, or social, like a just political order or even a good reputation, or personal, like health and longevity. Life led well refers to agential dimension of flourishing life, to the good conduct of life from right thoughts of the heart and right acts to right habits and virtues. Life feeling as it should is about affective dimension of flourishing life, about states of happiness like contentment and joy and empathy. Each of the three features has its own integrity, but each is not like a leg of some good life stool bearing separately the weight. Instead, each also is tied to the other two, both influencing them and being influenced by them. So this then is what we mean by a vision of flourishing life. A set of explicit or implicit convictions about what it means for us to lead life well, for life to go well, and to feel right. Convictions that guide or should guide all our desires and efforts. In the Christian faith, centered as it is on divine word become flesh in Jesus Christ as the true life and light of the world, Christian faith is such a vision, or rather, it is a large and quarrelsome family of such visions. Christian theology ought to be above all about critically discerning, articulating, and commending this vision. With this goal, theologians ought to enter the centuries-long and global conversation in which religious and unreligious thinkers wrestle about the most important human question. What is the true flourishing life, and how can we live it? But why? Aren't there other issues we ought to attend to, both more pressing and perhaps more manageable than this biggest of the big questions, like various forms of exclusion or exploitation? Can't we just assume a Christian vision of flourishing is given and go on with the endeavor of living it? Now, some people dismiss the exploration of good life as a luxury, a matter of maybe extra credit which we can take up if we are so inclined, and after the necessities of life, like food or shelter or safety, have been secured, and secured for all people. It is a mistake, however, to suppose that the satisfaction of basic needs can be separated from the meaning and goodness of life. Basic needs are famously difficult to pin down. Beyond the resources human beings require as biological organisms, the very determination of what constitutes a basic human need depends not just on the social standing of a person, but decisively also on the kind of life we find worth desiring. Moreover, cultural, economic, and political struggle against deprivation and oppression will fail if a positive vision of flourishing life does not guide it. That's why, according to the Gospels, Jesus didn't just feed the poor and heal the sick, although he did that. He called them to reorient their entire life around seeking God and God's righteousness. I believe that we insult the humanity of languishing when we suggest that the concern with the basic character and direction of their lives is somehow beyond their reach, that they have to progress on the hierarchy of needs, from food, shelter, to safety, to community, to self-esteem, to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, until finally they are capable of reflecting on the meaning and puzzling out the shape of the true life. An 8-year-old girl getting up before dawn to take the one family cow to pasture before going to school, which is, I'm referring here to my mother, can ask no less that question as can respected scientists working in industry. Those racked with pain because of illness, suffering under yoke of oppression, or worrying about their next meal need visions of human fullness at least as much as sometimes more than those who are healthy, unconstrained, and well-fed. Many of those who formulated great ancient visions of human flourishing, as well as the vast majority of those who embraced them through the centuries, lived in circumstances most people in economically developed countries today would describe as dire. Suffering of one kind or another and the indignities that accompany it have been historically and continue to be presently the main motor for both the search for a vision of life that is truly worthy human beings and for the struggle, personal and social, to turn that vision into reality. Sometimes I want to say that it's actually people who are well off that push aside the question of the good life, and those who are more impoverished are likely to take it up. A compelling vision of flourishing life is not a luxury. A cozy reading room for a middle-class home which already has a kitchen, bedroom, living space, and bedrooms. It is a basic need for a being who does not and cannot live by bread alone. All human beings, in all cultures, each in their own way, aspire to genuine flourishing, their own and that of those for whom they care. First, we are inescapably oriented toward some good, toward things, status of affairs, practices, and emotions we perceived as good. Second, we are reflective and moral beings. We want to know that the good toward which we are striving is, in fact, desirable. Finally, aware as we are of living in time, we gather our past in memory and future in anticipation, and want to be assured of the goodness or rightness of our whole life. Unless the speed and noise of life are unrelenting, we will occasionally survey our life, past, present, and future, and ask what would it mean for the entirety of it to be good. Truly flourishing life is the most important concern of our lives, the pearl for which it is worth selling everything else we might have: wealth, power, fame, or pleasure. With that pearl, we receive back improved the kinds of things we've sold to acquire it. Without that pearl, we ourselves are diminished and lost, and none of the things we refuse to sell in order to acquire it can make up for the damage. But like swine of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, many of us, ordinary people and intellectuals alike, and especially in the affluent West, we trample that pearl under our feet, seeing in it nothing fit to satisfy our wayward hunger. Today, more than in any previous time in history, the character of flourishing life is a pressing concern. Though the issue is ancient, as we have seen, we now ask it and have to answer it in a new way. In ages past, as in some traditional cultures today, a vision of good life was largely inscribed into the objective conditions of lived lives, in the perceived givenness of the cosmic and social orders, in accepted religious rituals and traditions, in ways in which communities engaged in cultural, economic, and political reproduction of life. Even individuals' vocations were mostly passed from mother to daughter and from father to son. Even when a person needs to discern the specific shape of their particular life, but most oh, sorry, something's wrong here. In any case, most people, even when people needed to discern specific shapes of their lives, most people believed that the ultimate goal and the tables of value from which that particular shape gained significance was pre-given, perhaps even natural. For a large and increasing portion of the world's population, this is no longer the case. In culture shaped by modernity, we have come to live disembedded lives, to use a phrase of Charles Taylor. No longer experiencing ourselves as constituents of meaningful cosmos and members of a social body, we modern human beings perceive ourselves and act first and foremost as individuals, sovereign owners of ourselves and our actions. We can no longer read off meaning from our social and cosmic locations. Nothing has claim to our allegiance until we first choose to give it our allegiance. We live under what many years ago Peter Berger, a sociologist, has described as a heretical imperative. We are not just free to choose, we are forced to do so. As a consequence, what counts as flourishing life and what it means specifically for each to flourish require from us intentional deliberation. As we will see shortly, we tend not to spend much time on the matter, but either simply float along in a lazy river or paddle madly in the boulder-riddled rapids to beat others to the finish line. Still, we float and we paddle in a cultural river with many currents and crossed currents. When we become reflective about our lives, we must contend with those diverse currents and are forced to choose and reconfirm the choices we have made. Even a birth into a rich tradition that initially defined the flourishing life for us doesn't relieve us from the choice. Instead of simply taking on and living out a preset vision of flourishing, perhaps struggling but failing to live or chafing against it, we are pushed to engage always afresh the question, which life is, in fact, good? Now, let's remind ourselves what is the nature of the choice we are talking about here. To choose here is not so much to pick one among many of more or less desirable things. It is to opt for the direction of our entire life, either to confirm the course we are on and which we enact without much thought in the myriad of daily choices we make, or to change the course of our lives. Put more abstractly, we are deciding among the candidates for the character and purpose of our lives and for reflexive standards by which we evaluate our ordinary choices. We are deciding about what kind of human being is it worth being and what kind of world is it worth inhabiting. For a century and a half or so, many in the West were convinced that when it comes to vision of flourishing life, the main choice was between some form of religious faith and secularism. Secularism seemed to be winning, in fact, but the situation has proven to be more complicated. Globally, religions, particularly Buddhism, Christianity and Islam, continue to grow in absolute and relative terms, shape the private and public lives of billions, and spread throughout the world. For most people today, the choice is not between religious faith or lack of it. It is among many forms of religious faith and irreligious philosophies of life. Multiple visions of flourishing life, mutually contending through though rarely completely incompatible, and each explicitly or implicitly claiming to stand for the true life, all of them vie for our allegiance. we are choosing in a post-secular and pluralistic world. Free to choose, and at the same time saddled with necessity of doing so, we are also faced with the choice between meaningful life and life bereft of meaning. Many of those who see themselves as living in the long shadow of what Nietzsche called the death of God embrace the idea, either with resignation or courage, that they can give no better reason for their basic choices than their preference itself. But to choose something just because we want is to empty our choice of significance. Any meaning that we give, we can take away as well. Any choice that we make then seems as good as any other. In some version of the world in which preferences are kings and queens, religious choices become as good as irreligious ones, and life cannot be rescued from threat of arbitrariness. The possibility of meaninglessness too, and not just multiple offers of visions of true and meaningful life, keep us searching and choosing. Perhaps I'll take this off. You wouldn't mind? Okay, a little break. For you and for me. With multiple competing accounts of flourishing life vying for our allegiance while trying to ward off nihilism, the question of flourishing life is now more open and more pressing than ever. Yet just at this moment, serious reflection with this question is ebbing. For one, our lives seem to be too crowded, too busy, we might say, were it not that after long hours of work, we let entertainment and various addictions gobble up a good portion of the remaining time. Our lives seem too crowded to allow us to give sustained attention to the challenge of discerning life truly worth living. Writer David Foster Wallace described well the predicament of people living in modern, fast-paced, and entertainment-saturated societies. It is not just that we don't know how to live meaningful lives, he said. We don't even seem to be able to focus for very, very long on the question. On rare occasions, when we do focus, we are confronted with our lack of knowledge and skill to articulate for ourselves a vision of the good life. In the Life Worth Living course that we teach at Yale College, a student once remarked, exasperating with the predicament in which he found himself, the world's greatest traditions have been trying to answer this question for more than 3,000 years. And now I'm supposed to work out my own answer in my spare time? With neither skill nor tools to tackle the question, we resort to the habits we have learned in making consumer choices. We consult our gut feelings and some life project equivalent of consumer reports, and we decide, provisionally, for the most part, always keeping options open. Too often, the heart simply wants what it wants, and persuaded that it would wrong itself if it didn't get it, the heart makes the choice for us. Our only master seemed to be our taste, supposedly so authentically ours, and yet so consistently mirroring what is around us. But it isn't just that we are too busy and inept to take on responsibility for the direction of our lives. In the course of modernity, the notion of the good life has been privatized. If a kid asked what to do with his or her life, writes German sociologist Hartmut Rosa, teachers, friends, family will be sure to offer their advice, but they will almost inevitably rush to add, just find out for yourself. listen to your heart, come to know your talents and your yearnings. Thus, the good life has become the most intimately private matter. It is not just that we believe that we ought to be able to decide for ourselves how to live. We believe that the vision of life that is good for us is encoded in our particular character as individuals, and that our choice about the matter is valuable and worthy of respect just because it is ours and it resonates with who we perceive ourselves to be. An inviolable criterion of the good life is that it is authentically ours. Not so long ago, we considered the founders of religions and great philosophers who thought deeply about the question of life worth living as kind of doctors, medical doctors and nutritionists of our humanity. We expected them to tell us what is good for our human wholeness and why, and if we disagreed, we argued back, telling them where and why they were wrong. Now we really relate to them as to waiters in a restaurant, on whom we count to describe each dish, but not to tell us what would be good for us to order. In fact, we half expect that they will praise any choice we make, for every one of them is by definition good if we like the dish. No religious figure, no philosopher, no scientist can know what kind of life is good, certainly not what kind of life is good for us. We alone are the true experts of how our talents and yearnings conjoin to give birth to our dreams. Though silent about the nature of flourishing life, modern cultures are very clear, even strident, about preconditions for flourishing life. Secure the resources you might need for living your dream, whatever that might be. That is the overruling rational imperative of modernity. That's Hartmut Rosa has written that as well. Whatever you may end up choosing as your good in the course of life, you will be better off if you accumulate economic, social, cultural, symbolic, and bodily capital. In other words, if you're rich, emotionally intelligent, educated, well-connected, and good-looking. We invest most of our time and energy securing these resources. They make it possible for us to pursue our dreams and to do so not just today but also tomorrow, when we ourselves, our world, our dreams may be very different than they are today. Rosa offers an image of situation in which we find ourselves. In a way, we moderns resemble a painter who is forever concerned about improving his materials, the colors and brushes, the air condition and lighting, the canvas and easel, but never really starts to paint. Perhaps another image is apt as well. When the means for life have become the ends of life, the dog has started chasing its tail. Now, to chase one's tail is bad enough, but to have to chase it faster than anyone else verges on madness. Yet this is our situation. The resources we think we need to live a good life are competitive goods. It is not just that it is better to have more than less of them. We need to have more of them than our competitors do. We have to have more wealth than the others, better education than somebody else, more fame, better looks, and so on. We are like a painter obsessed with having better tools of her trade than any of her colleagues because she believes that superior tools themselves make her a great painter. In the course of modernity, we have made the business of securing resources we think we need to live the life we want into chief goal of our lives and the main purpose of our major institutions, the state, the market, science, the technology, education, and even religion. The task of securing resources keeps us busy. We work today more than ever, but work is of course not all we do. We enjoy the pleasures of life as well. For many, they are the purpose of work and of life itself. But when pleasures become our goal, we are in danger of becoming Nietzsche's last men. Beings weary of great striving and obsessed with comfort and safety, dreaming petty dreams and enjoying unsubtle pleasures, entertaining ourselves to idiocy while imagining ourselves as the measure of humanity. I'm describing couch potatoes. Or Nietzsche was describing some equivalent to couch potatoes. If we are more into competition than comfort, we treat enjoyments as resource. We compete in the sophistication and expense of pleasures or of our consumption, and if we do better than most in our comparison group, we increase our reputational capital. In work, with all its achievement, and in leisure, with all its pleasures, we languish. And that busy languishing closes our ears to the cries of the oppressed and to the eyes, and our eyes to the destruction of environment, and we fail to attend to the shape of our very humanity. With taste in charge of the direction of our lives and reason deployed mainly for creation of resources for life, we are left vulnerable to a sneaking suspicion of arbitrariness of our lives. When during a lull in activities or in a moment of crisis, a little demon appears on our shoulders, whispering into our ear that our work and our pleasures don't matter at all, we don't know how to get rid of him. It's not necessarily that we are committed to convictions that entail meaninglessness of life. Worse yet, we are unaware of compelling options and have no wherewithal either to explore them or the intellectual and moral tools to adjudicate among them. The way we have been habituating to making choices about flourishing life almost guarantees that deeper meaning will escape us, and that if we should stumble upon it, we wouldn't even know how to recognize it. Creeping meaninglessness is a private cause of making the nature of the flourishing life a mere matter of taste. There is a public cost as well. Cultural dialogue about meaning of human life and about corresponding tables of values end up looking like a shouting talking heads of cable news. We are unable to reason with, even speak with one another about this most important project of our lives, let alone formulate a vision of flourishing life that encompasses the entire humanity and all creatures, a pressing concern in a highly interconnected and interdependent world. As a result, many prefer disengaged individualism of lives built on unreflective soft relativism. Your vision is true for you, my vision is true for me. They prefer that to lives invested in the truth of our common humanity, but bereft of any responsible means of contending for it or for forging a common bond to it. One might think that our colleges and universities would be places for serious exploration of the nature of flourishing life, pushing it against the deadening effect of work and fun loop we don't know how to escape. Perhaps in an early and direction-setting season of their lives, young men and women would learn to think intelligently and critically about how to succeed, not merely in one or another of their endeavors, but how to succeed in the endeavor that is their very life itself. After all, from its beginnings, whether we trace these to Socrates or to the founding of modern universities in the Middle Ages, and throughout most of its history up to mid-20th century, higher education has centered on the question of meaningful life, true life. The American idea of college was invented more or less precisely as a space in which one would ask and answer the big questions of life. But the great invention has lost much of its original purpose. Our colleges and universities have largely given up on the meaning of life, to use a phrase that occurs in the subtitle of Anthony Kronman's book on higher education called Education's End. Incremental increase in knowledge and advances in technological know-how are valued, not truth-seeking exploration of meaning and purpose. Especially in an age in which education needs to justify itself in economic terms, whatever accounts are offered of the value of education, they center on instrumental reason and technical skill, not on the goals of human life as a whole and ways to achieve them, not on the character of life worthy of being called human. Even courses that are about life, like Stanford's Design Your Life or Yale's Psychology and the Good Life, are more about helping students live the kind of life they want than discerning the kind of life that is worth wanting. That's a very important section. They're designed to helping students live the kind of life they want rather than discerning the kind of life that is worth wanting. Our educational institutions serve primarily to equip students with skills to be able to generate resources for the kind of life they may decide they want to live. If we can no longer count on colleges and universities for help in exploring the flourishing life, one might think that religious communities, churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples would center their activities and explorations on that question. We're not qualified to speak for religions other than Christianity, so we'll limit ourselves to what happens in ecclesial communities. Churches often do take the question. Witness the popularity of Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life. But it is common to employ the Christian faith primarily as a set of skills, resources, to manage a life whose course is preset by the demands of success in education and work, and by cultural habits formed around leisure and entertainment. In our private lives, we have a morning coffee, we exercise a bit and stretch, and if we are pious, we have a moment of devotional reading from the Bible or Oswald Chambers, and off we go to do things whose place in the truly flourishing life we have never considered in the light of our professed faith. Sunday worship services are too frequently no more than communal version of such energy-boosting, performance-enhancing, and get-well morning exercises. Many churches, of course, do much better, and to the extent that they do, they're important schools of flourishing life. So two traditional sites of sustained reflection on the flourishing life: the institutions of higher learning and houses of worship. In them too, the interest in exploring the most important question of human existence is waning. This in itself constitutes a cultural crisis of major proportions, partly also because it underpins and exacerbates many other crises. Many have sensed the resulting cultural vacuum and have attempted to fill it. Important philosophers have taken up the issue of the true life, sometimes with the goal of rescuing it from religious captivity back to philosophy and to the center of university concerns. Psychologists have done the same, especially those associated with positive psychology, though often with a problematic conflation of scientific knowledge and moral judgment. Religious thinkers from diverse religious traditions wrestle with the issue as well, of course, though often with little awareness of the changed conditions under which the question of flourishing life presents itself to people today. But all this is bucking the trend. Much work remains to reverse it. We need to revive a sustained truth-seeking cultural conversation about flourishing life. As we live in a globalized world with a plurality of partly overlapping and partly contradictory visions of flourishing life contending in the same public space, people of many diverse religious and non-religious perspectives will need to participate in that conversation. Christian theology and Christian faith ought to become one such voice. Along with philosophy in its ancient mode, for centuries Christian theology served in the West as the intellectual space for articulating visions of the flourishing life and sorting out contested questions of value. The great church father Augustine placed the problem of happy life at the heart of his theology. In one way or another, all great theologians did the same. They simply echoed in their own way, with conceptualities appropriate to their context, the orientation of the Christian faith toward the kingdom of God, life abundant, new creation, seeing God, New Jerusalem, or, as we like to put it, the establishment of God's home among humans. Today, too, theology has an indispensable contribution to make in countering taste-driven, individualized, unreflective ways of living and helping people articulate, embrace, and pursue a compelling vision of flourishing life, a vision of true life for themselves and for all creation. Theology has a contribution to make to humanity's search for true life, and theology must make that contribution if it's to remain true to its purpose. The main purpose of theology is the same as the goal of Jesus' mission. One way to express that mission is to look at what Jesus rejected during his temptations immediately before embarking upon his mission. The first temptation is the most fundamental. Turn these stones into bread. The tempter taunted Jesus, famished after 40-day fast in the wilderness. Jesus resisted, responding, "One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." Jesus was quoting the Hebrew Bible, Deuteronomy. These words came first to the children of Israel as a summary of the main lesson they were to have learned in the course of 40 years of wandering in the wilderness before entering the promised land. Bread was what they needed in the wilderness. That much was never in doubt. That truth, as insistent as a growling stomach, they did not need to learn. But they needed more, that they needed more than bread. That truth, not as obvious as the hunger, but as real as the possibility of missing our human purpose, that truth they needed to learn. All humans do, perhaps especially we moderns. We have made our greatest temptation into the chief goal of our lives and the main purpose of our major institutions, to create and enjoy more sophisticated varieties of bread. Living by bread alone, we failed our humanity. By not providing us with a compelling alternative vision of the good life, theology betrays its purpose. This is the tragedy of academic theology today. Right at the moment theology's tools are most needed to answer the most pressing question of our lives and serve the common good, they're found stacked in the corner, dusty and neglected, even or especially by those charged with keeping them sharp. Theology is in crisis, largely because it has lost its nerve and forgotten its purpose to help discern, articulate, and commend compelling visions of flourishing life in the light of God's self-revelation in Jesus Christ. Thank you.
자, 첫 번째 질문이 있습니다. 서로 다투면서 모든 이들의 충성을 얻기 위해 경쟁한다는 말에 동의합니다. 오늘날 한국 교회가 적대시하는 그 이슬람, 또 동성애, 진화론 이슈 등의 구조를 만드는 일에 조언을 해주신다는 게 정확하게 제가 잘 이해를 못하겠습니다. 하여간 한국 교회가 서로가 적대시하는 구조를 만들어가고 있는데 맞습니까? 거기에 대해 조언을 좀 해달라 그런 말씀일 것 같습니다.
Well, I don't know Korean church very well.
잘 모르십니다.
And if you don't know somebody very well, don't give them advice. But I'm familiar with other situations where there is such antagonism toward those who markedly differ from us. I grew up in a communist society. Much of the church had a very stridently negative view of Marxism. I wrote a doctoral dissertation trying to understand Marxism and engaged it in a positive way. I grew up in an environment where Muslims were my neighbors. Many of my compatriots felt that the only thing they can say is something negative about them. And though I disagreed with Marxism and I disagree with Islam, I'm a kind of Orthodox Christian in just about all the key beliefs. I at the same time felt that I can learn something from them. So my stance is that all truth is God's truth, and we should be open and respectful of all truth where we find it. We should rejoice over truth wherever we find it, and we should not be bashful to bear witness to what we believe, but do so in gentleness and with love toward those with whom we speak.
예, 그 한국 교회에 대해서는 잘 모르지만 그러나 본인이 이제 살아온 인생에 서로 이렇게 서로 굉장히 적대시하는 그런 환경 속에서 이제 지냈습니다. 그런데 그 공산주의 국가에서 자랐는데 박사 논문에 그 막시즘에 대해서 상당히 긍정적인 평가를 하는 논문을 썼다고 합니다. 그리고 이제 그 이슬람 회교도 이웃들도 많이 있었는데 주위에 자랄 때 또 그들에게 뭔가를 배울 수 있을 것이다 이제 그렇게 생각을 한답니다. 그 이유는 모든 진리라는 것 그것은 결국 하나님의 진리가 아니냐라는 따라서 우리가 그 다른 종류의 그 주장과 그런 진리에 대한 주장을 듣고 상당히 부드럽게 마음을 열고 존중하고 또 무엇보다도 그것을 즐거워할 수 있어야 된다라고 생각합니다.
We fight because we fear.
우리가 두려워하기 때문에 우리가 싸운다라는 거죠.
And one of the most frequent encouragement, injunction in the New Testament is fear not.
그 신약 성경에서 가르치는 가장 중요한 그 가르침은 지금 여기 연관지어서 그것은 아무것도 두려워하지 말라라는 것입니다. 만약 그 진리를 제대로 알고 있다면. 다음 질문 한번 찾아보겠습니다. 지금 번역의 삶은 창세기 1장 28절을 생육하고 충만하고 다스리는 삶이 성취되는 것을 의미하는 것 같다. 그런데 아담은 실패했고 예수님께서 오셔서 그 삶을 살 수 있도록 다시 길을 열어주신 것 같은데 우리는 단지 예수 믿고 죄에서 구원받은 후 개인적으로 도덕적인 삶을 살다가 죽은 뒤에 천국 가는 것이 우리 신앙의 전부로 알고 있습니다. 2000년 동안 이러한 번역의 삶에 대한 비전이 왜 알려지지 않았던 것일까요? 지금 이 번역의 삶이라는 지금 볼프에서 주장하는 번역의 삶이 2000년 동안 왜 알려지지 않았냐 그런 말씀이실 것 같은데 실제로 그런 내용이 2000년 동안 계속 주장되어 왔다고 지금 얘기하신 거죠. 알려지지 않은 게 아니라. 근데 어쨌든 제가 질문을 던져보겠습니다.
On the first question, I basically don't disagree with you. I think the better image of flourishing is less Genesis 1:28 than Genesis 2, the garden as the image of flourishing. And the other great image of flourishing in the Bible is Revelation, the New Jerusalem, the heavenly city. these two images bookend the Bible. There is also the fact that human beings fell from the good into which God has set them. And that's why redemption is a necessary aspect of the Christian faith. But redemption is a redemption from something and to something. And redemption is a redemption into the good news of the kingdom, which I have expressed in the term the home of God. World, or entire world as a home of God, which is the image that you have in the book of Revelation. That's God's intention for the humanity, and that's why Jesus came, to be God with us, both to not just to free us from captivity to sin and to suffering, but also to take us into something new, something that even Adam did not experience. The redemption is not return to the origin. Redemption is a move towards something that is more than what was in the origins. And I believe that this is then the flourishing life. Image for me of not the image, the person who embodies flourishing life for me is Jesus Christ. The entirety of the story of Jesus is the story of a flourishing life, meaning from the beginnings, from birth, beginnings of his ministry, all the way through his resurrection, exaltation, and glorification.
예, 질문하신 분의 질문에 기본적으로 동일합니다. 동일하고 번영의 삶 혹은 뭐 충만한 삶. 그 이미지는 두 가지로 우리가 발견할 수 있는데 성경에서 그 창세기 2장보다는 창세기 1장에 있는 가든의 에덴 동산에 아주 풍요로운 여러 각종 식물도 채소든지 거기에서 우리가 알 수 있고, 또 하나 중요한 것은 요한 계시록에 계시록에서 새 예루살렘에 대한 그 모습들, 이런 모습들이 이제 우리 번영의 삶이라고 이제 생각할 수 있습니다. 물론 아담이 그렇게 살아가는 걸 실패를 했죠. 실패를 해서 예수께서 오신 것인데, 그러나 예수께서 오셔서 하신 구원이라는 것은 두 가지 방향을 가집니다. 하나는 무엇인가 사로잡힌 것으로부터 우리를 해방시키는 구원이 있고, 또 다른 하나는 우리를 어디로 인도하는 그런 구원이 있습니다. 그래서 죄의 포로된 자로부터 해방하는 것이 전자라면, 후자는 이제 우리 주장하는 그런 번영의 삶으로 우리를 인도한다는 겁니다. 그 번영의 삶으로 인도한다는 것은 결국은 하나님의 집, 사실 두 번째 강연이 하나님의 집에 대한 그런 강연입니다. 그러니까 세계가 하나님의 집이다라는 거죠. 그러니까 하나님의 집으로 우리를 인도하는 것, 그것이 이제 구원의 하나의 큰 중요한 요소이다라고 생각을 합니다. 그리고 그것이 바로 하나님의 의도다라고 이렇게 생각합니다. 하나님 우리와 같이 함께 있다는 것. 그래서 이것은 단순히 창조했을 때 에덴 동산의 그 모습으로, 원래의 모습으로 돌아가는 것이 아니라 아담이 미처 깨닫지도 못했던 새로운 상태로 가게 되는 것이다, 이렇게 주장을 합니다. 그래서 그러면은 그 번영의 삶의 구체적인 내용을 가장 잘 발견할 수 있는 도대체 누구냐? 그럼 그리스도가 바로 이 본인이 주장하는 번영의 삶의 가장 구체적인 내용을 발견할 수 있는 분이다. 그리스도의 탄생과 그리스도의 삶과 죽음과 부활과 승천과 영화롭게 된 그 속에 가장 번영의 삶의 참된 모습이 있다고 생각합니다.
Two things only. I don't think I'm proposing anything new, just a new version of the old. And two, if you took away the word flourishing from what I was saying, completely erased it, and replaced it by true life, nothing would be lost from what I said.
두 가지를 첨가해서 얘기를 하고 싶은데, 이제 왜 2000년 동안에 이것이 감춰졌는가라는 질문이 있어서 아마 생각이 나서 대답을 하는 것 같습니다. 감춰진 것이 아니고 오랫동안 얘기해 왔던 것에 대해 새로운 버전으로 얘기하고 있다는 거죠. 이미 이제 많은 신학자들이나 많은 사람들이 얘기해 왔던 것을 새롭게 다시 이제 얘기하고 있는 것이다라고 생각을 하고, 그 다음에 만약에 이 번영의 삶이라는 플러리싱한 이 단어가 예를 들어서 뭐 번영신학이랄까 뭐 이런 이제 세속적인 그런 가치관을 추구하는 좀 왜곡된 그런 신학적 흐름과 유사하다는 그런 오해를 불러일으킬 가능성이 있다. 라고 할 경우에는 그 완전히 그걸 없애버리고 그 단어를 그보다는 진정한 삶, true life로 이해하는 것이 자기가 지금 의미하는 그런 그 flourishing life의 본질적인 의미입니다. 그 다음에 질문을 하나만 더 해도 되겠습니까? 너무 늦어서 이걸 했고요. 제가 조금 더 살펴보겠습니다. Okay, I think this is important question. Let me read it for you. 세계화가 인간의 번영에 도움이 될까요? 이 질문 참 좋은 질문인 이유가 이분이 세계화의 문제를 많이 다루고 있기 때문에 그렇습니다. 그리고 그 질문하는 이유가 제3세계 국가들은 세계화의 희생양 혹은 피해로 입고 있지 않나요? 중요한 질문이죠.
So my reading on globalization is that it is a highly ambivalent, ambiguous phenomenon. That there are goods that results from it, but there are also grave evils that are associated with it. And both are true. So in some ways, I think globalization or the market, which I think is market-driven, I think in some ways globalization helps in our flourishing lives. In other ways, it hinders them in profound ways. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book on globalization connected with flourishing, and I said why globalization, why we need religion in a globalized world. I mean why we need, as a Christian, I mean why we need Christian faith in the globalized world in order to humanize globalization, in order to humanize globalizing processes. And one of the main things that globalization does that I think is pernicious and which most people don't even think about is that it lowers our sights only to the ordinary life and increasing our material well-being. So that we end up striving to live by bread alone. Now, living by bread alone is the great temptation of today's globalization processes. In the process, a lot of people still remain hungry, both the rich and the poor. Of course, poor are much worse for being hungry than rich are, but nonetheless, if one lives by bread alone, one can never be satisfied. And market sometimes wants to seduce you as if you had this other thing, you would be satisfied. It kind of teases your desire, which is constantly generated anew, and yet in the process it undermines satisfaction. It is predicated on malcontent. If we became all content, it would stop, right? It's predicated on malcontent, feeds malcontent, and therefore cannot properly satisfy us. And I think that's a very important aspect that needs to be pushed back. And one of the reasons why we are so destructive toward our environment, why there is such an incredible discrepancy between rich and the poor in the world, is partly because we have all our goods as competitive goods. We have goods as positional goods, meaning we don't need those goods. A good example of positional good is a golden Apple Watch. It's no better in function. Aesthetically, it's not particularly more pleasing either than the ordinary Apple Watch. But the gold Apple Watch costs $10,000, whereas the ordinary one costs, $500. But why do you wear the golden Apple Watch? Well, you wear it so that you show that you're somebody, right? That you're better than somebody else. It elevates you, and the other person feels bad about themselves because they don't have what you do, and so the circle is moving. Competitive and positional goods are making our lives deeply dissatisfying. And I think that's why we need to rediscover anew that human beings don't live by bread alone. I'll say one more thing and then I'll stop. No, I'll add it later.
처음에 저 받아 적기는 했는데 잊어버렸어요 지금. 그 본인의 글로벌라이제이션 세계화라는 개념이 굉장히 애매모호한 개념이라는 거예요. 양면성을 띠는 불확실한 아주 애매모호한 개념인데 그 이유는 양면성을 다 가지고 있는 거죠. 한편으로는 이제 분명히 좋은 면이 있지만 다른 한편으로는 아주 심각하게 좋은 악을 갖고 있는 그런 면이 있습니다. 그래서 예를 들어서 이제 그 시장을 중심으로 한 그런 세계화라는 것, 지구화라는 것은 때로는 우리를 돕기도 하지만, 즉 이제 플로리싱의 번영의 삶을 돕기도 하지만 번영의 삶을 방해하기도 합니다. 그래서 바로 종교가 필요하다라는 거죠. 종교는 이제 삶의 의미를 물어보는 것이기 때문에. 그리고 결국 이제 지구화 과정 속에서 보통 사람들이 굉장히 심한 유혹을 받는데, 그래서 결국은 이제 더 얼마나 많이 가질 것이냐라는 문제, 얼마나 많이 소유할 것이냐라는 문제. 지금 뭐 예를 들어서 금으로 입힌 what is Apple Watch? You mean Apple company? I see. I thought it's Apple Watch. 애플 회사에서 만드는데 뭐 금을 이렇게 해가지고 하는 게 시리가 있는 모양이죠. 굉장히 비싼 모양인데 도대체 그걸 왜 우리가 가져야 하느냐라는 겁니다. 그러니까 경쟁적이고 소유적인 것을 보여주고 과시하기 위해 그걸 만드는 겁니다. 가지는 것인데 그것이 이제 만약에 세계화의 어떤 내용이 됐을 때는 상당히 문제가 많다는 거예요. 그래서 잘못된 내용에 대해 지적할 수 있는 것은 사실은 종교가 아니냐. 바로 이제 이런 점입니다. 그러니까 단순히 글로벌라이제이션 그 자체만을 지금 추구하는 것이 아니고 그것이 갖고 있는 구체적인 내용에 관해 이분은 분명히 지적을 하고 있는 것 같습니다. 예, 이제 그만해야 될 것 같습니다. 예, 고맙습니다.